So I did want to kind of get into the specifics of some of these vintage amps, and I know that you have
Sure.
a particular favorite that you like, but
Yes.
I wanted to kick off a list that I kind of pulled together from a couple of people. And when I started polling people, hey, what do you think is maybe the most classic vintage amp out there? The first name or the most dominant brand, let's say, that came was a McIntosh 275. So I think
Mhm.
most people who are into this hobby know that McIntosh has built a brand that is kind of a thing all its own. It's its own beast. And I feel like maybe a lot of this started around the time, or at least a lot of the volume of it built around the time of the Macintosh 275. They have a look, which is important for a brand, regardless of how it sounds, right? But they have a look, they have a feel, they've built a brand where people see it and outside the hobby, they know what it is. That is a thing aside again from how the Sonics are. What's your take on the Macintosh 225? And I can talk all day about brand. I know that really well. If you see one at a garage sale, you probably could buy it for the brand and sell it for the brand. But what about the sound? What do you think was kind of made that an interesting find or stand out at least at its time in place in history?
Sure. So, I mean, one would argue it started like the MC30s,
Mm-hmm.
and then the MC40s, uh, MC60s, MC75s, MC275. And people would then tell you that, hey, what about the industrial Mac 50 and the MI 200? And Mac did a lot of interesting things. So Macintosh's big claim to fame is what they call a unity coupled circuit. Not getting too specific into it, here's the one of the basic things to know. Super simple tube circuit, super complicated transformer.
Mm.
The magic of the Macintosh tube amps is the output transformers. They are complicated to wind. They're not serviceable. They there's a guy named Foshan in Taiwan that will rewind Mac output transformers, and he makes exceptionally good transformers in and of himself. Um, but they're a bear to undo and redo. I mean, one might argue the same thing about like the potted Marantz transformers. But the Mac, when you look at a Mac and you tube amp, uh, they're super serviceable for a few reasons. So they build on in the classic Macintoshes up until, let's go with up until like the 80s. They were they were built on turret boards. So if you think a turret board is going to look like a wafer board that like a guitar amp might have. So it looks like a phenolic board that might be about 8 inches long, 2 inches tall. It has components suspended on it on little pins called turrets, and uh, the amps are they seem simpler than they are because the transformer is much more complicated than you look at just a big can. Because Mac amps tend to have these potted transformers that are put in cans,
Mm-hmm.
big black potted transformers put in cans. Um, and their complexity is hidden by the transformer. So servicing them is really, really ridiculously easy because it's like you have. So I'm going to show. This is called the poor man's 275. Everybody, this is called a Dynaco ST35. They're more ubiquitous than a 275.
Mm.
This is called the poor man's 275. It's only 17 watts instead of 75, but it will do everything you need it to do. But so a Mac 275 would have one or two or three of these can capacitors. You could buy replacements of these. They're like $35, no big deal.
Mm.
35 to $50 each, no big deal. And so you'd replace like three of these, and then you'd replace a handful of like little components that you might hear, like this capacitor here. And it would be really easy to see how to replace it with a soldering iron. You heat up the solder joint, you remove the part, put the new part in, flow some new solder. YouTube would tell you how to do it. And wham bam boom, it would be um, up and running again. Uh, People might argue that the Mac sound, Mac would tell you that their amps are linear. Linear and acoustically, linear are two different things.
Hmm.
Linear as measured and linear as perceived are two different things.
Hmm.
I think that the Mac sound is what most people would describe as the American hi-fi sound in large measure, which is to say a fat or predominant bass region, a slightly fat mid-range, meaning a slight elevation in the mid-range, and a slight roll-off in the high frequencies.
Hmm.
People used to love to either put like Mac tube amps with like Klipsch Cornwalls as an example, with a big 15-inch woofer, super efficient. So like you put a 75-watt tube amp on a 98 dB efficient speaker that can play to 115 decibels, and you have American rock and roll. Like,
Right.
and then if you were a discerning audiophile, you go, no, I want a JBL instead. And JBLs were like better versions of vintage Klipsch speakers with better horns, mid ranges, and tighter bass. And I think that a discerning audiophile might say that Mac 275 and a set of like JBL L300s or L200s or L100s would be a really fantastic speaker pairing. And then that got co-opted in the 90s to say B&Ws, as precise as they are, paired with Mac amps is a really wonderful balancing act between the two things, because you have the British reserved B&W sound, and then you have the American dense mid-range and fat bass section. And people love that too, because then the B&Ws would give a little bit more treble extension.
Mm.
If you can buy a McIntosh tube amp for what you deem a reasonable price, you should. They are a protected investment. They are like buying a bond.
Mm.
If bought at the right price, you will never lose money on it.
Hmm.
And it will not depreciate from its value proposition, because there's a brand value and then there's a product value.
Mm-hmm.
Mac 275s today, the modern version is even more precise, even more powerful, but is not what the 275 was 60 years ago. And if you're buying one used, you might argue that up until about the 90s is where you want to, 90s, maybe 2000s is where you want to go, because the Mac, the transformer being as complicated as it was through that period of time, you could actually change out tubes and would never have to rebias the amp. It biased itself, did a thing called bootstrapping, and it was really versatile. Now, to get more bandwidth and power, they have to be serviced with tube changes.
That was going to be my question, because like if you guys are familiar with whiskey drinking, there's a certain vintage of Pappy Van Winkle that you want to buy up to. So you're saying the same thing for these Macs, that there was a certain year where we kind of transfer over from the vintage to the modern day. And what year would you say that is again?
I didn't know that there was a problem with Pappy to buying different Pappies. That's interesting. By the way, if you for those who can see the Rorschach on my arm,
yeah, Johnny Walker.
Do
you have before we go on? Do you have a favorite flavor of Johnny Walker? Because they do make a few.
The one I guess it's a Pappy thing. So green used to be single batch, single malt,
mm-hmm.
and then they fudged it up and made it a blend.
Yep.
So it used to be like, if you wanted to know the house sound, the house taste, it was green, and that's no longer the case.
Because I've been to a couple of their tastings, and their variety is fun. Like the gold, they make all these little one-offs and small runs and stuff, and I have enjoyed them on some scale. I do like the little batches they do, but mostly even guys like I'm a Blue or something that they can get a bar.
So I'm going to tell you like sacrilegiously. So like my name's Justin Weber, and so JW, and it was like the first drink my mother gave me to drink, because it was like her drink. So it has like a lot of sentimental value. The way I drink it, people will find sort of sacrilegious, but then I'm going to give you a counterpoint that like hopefully will make sense.
It's not mixed with
So,
Coke, is it?
fuck yes it is. But it's Mexican Coke. Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry. That totally redeems it. Then it totally redeems it.
Wait, no, because the cane sugar, look, it's a smoky drink, right? And so you add some cane sugar and a little lime.
Yeah. Okay. That's a thing.
Wait. I have come to appreciate bourbons infinitely more, and or sipping whiskeys. I like Irish sipping whiskeys.
Yeah.
But Johnny Walker and Coke, don't knock. Don't.
Oh no. And listen, I spent a majority of my 20s Jack and Coke, so I have nothing to really complain about. But I enjoy.
At least they didn't say Makers and Dr. Pepper.
Makers and Dr. Pepper. Dr. Pepper just took over as like the number 2 cola over Pepsi. People love that stuff. I
could never drink Pepsi. Like, if someone says Pepsi, it's like iced tea, please.
I don't know. My mother, as you're talking about mom, her drink was Dr. Pepper. So I think I have an appreciation for Dr. Pepper and a mix here and there. But yeah, Johnny Walker's good. The Blanton's situation and then the Pepe Van Winkle, which we were talking about, it's to get back on track a little bit. It's just that they went to a blend over time is the rumor. Now, this is not I'd have to look up the exact date, but most people who drink it say, hey, at some point they ran out of the original barrels, and then they had to play catch up because of the market and so forth. This is a theory. Now, the other people might have hard, concrete truths, and you can probably Google it, but generally speaking, rule of thumb is an older vintage bottle of Pappy 21 or 23, whatever they got, is the classic. And modern Pappy isn't quite the same. Even if you go to those older vintage, those older years.
That's why you choose Middleton. Middleton's.
I always thought for a long time Blanton single barrel was pretty darn good, and then the price shot through the roof. So I don't know, but it's made by the same distillery as them. Buffalo Trace is the name. So, anyways. Back to vintage. So,
I love McIntosh. I've owned lots of McIntosh because it falls from and I'll tell you which ones I own if I were buying them.
Please.
Okay.
Yeah.
Modern McIntosh amps have bias pots, meaning like how to set the operating point of the amp inside their 275s, and they have microprocessors. I have a personal hatred for tube amps including microprocessors. I think that is about as oxymoronic as it gets. It is how to make them safer, because if there's like a tube fault, too short, how to make them safer. 100% understand that. It is how to get them to do other things that microprocessors can help you do. Manage lots of operating points at the same time. It's super cool in that way. But if that microprocessor fails, you're gonna have to do some things to bypass it. Now, they rarely ever fail, but I could give you some vulgar ideas of things you can do to modify yourself that might make you better. But you wouldn't want to do it. Just if you accept a thing for what it is, you can find the value in it. And I think that looking at high value things, discover high value ideas, and perpetuate that forward, finding things that don't need specialized servicing is the right answer. They think that anything in the 2000s is a mistake to have bought as far as a Mac 275, unless you're buying it as an audiophile and understanding that you have a relationship with your dealer and a service center, and your dealer will take care of you because you're trying to get the most value from your purchase, the performance for your purchase. No big deal, not faulting. It's just a different engagement style. But if you look at like a 90s 275, like Gordon Gow edition and back, uh, they didn't need ever to come back to McIntosh. And if they needed servicing, a voltmeter and a soldering iron would generally service them.
Hmm.
So that's a really good, if you ever discover a 275, you discover almost any piece of Mac equipment, you should buy it. It's a good value. But the tube amps from like Gordon Gow edition back represent more residual value. And the nice thing about the late 90s or mid 90s to the early 2000 Macs is that you actually bridge them. I guess all Macs you could have bridged at one point, but they make it easier to bridge and turn them into 150 monoblocks instead of 275. That's kind of cool. I don't have a need for that personally. I believe in pairing my speakers. Well, two things. I think that most people never need as much power as they think they need. And I think that um, moderately, I think that if people showed some degree of restraint in speaker choices, that they would buy speakers that start with the number 9 for efficiency, not speakers that start with the number 8.
Right.
So 87 dB, 84, 82 through 89 dB are unacceptably low efficient speakers. They're compact, they use multiple drivers, they have very complicated crossovers. Whereas speakers that start with a 9, 92 through 98, you can get away with 5 to 17 watts and have a simpler device and perhaps more sonic bliss.
Mm.
But Justin, what would you buy from a Mac? The Mac MC30s don't sound like anything else. So if you want a sort of more single-ended sound or a more relaxed sound, the MC30s are great. You can still get good values, and they were originally in consoles, typically high-end consoles. And so you can buy a Mac 75, a Mac 30 for a very reasonable value, and they use 6L6s. If I remember correctly, they use a special 6L6, but that's neither here nor there. Like metal bottle 6L6, they don't actually light up. It's like actually a metal envelope. The one I like the most, so Mac 30s use tube rectifiers, have a more romantic sound. I like the MC40s, which were sort of the same idea as an MC30, but it used glass 6L6s, like 6L6 GCs. Very famous tube. Very common, made today. But they were solid state rectified instead of tube rectified, and so they had better bass.
Mm.
And so the MC40s, I think you can get really good value. Like if you're finding like a sneaky Pete value, the MC40s are like one of the better value propositions. Then you have the 60s. No one can afford them. Don't buy them. Stay away. It's like trying to buy a vintage Ferrari. It's just going to break your heart. Or a Corvette. They have two tube rectifiers. It's 2 KT88s. They're super cool. They're super expensive. They're super cool. They're super expensive. The MC75s were a slightly more compact version. I think they're solid state rectified instead of tube rectified. So the MC60s would be like kind of the holy grail. And the MC75s are super cool. I bought reissue MC75s at one point, which is totally cool. But yeah, the MC75s are a nice, wonderful choice too. Now the 275 is going to be the easiest to find. It's because it's had like a 60-year production cycle and different iterations. They go like I think they're on like the Mark 6, and so I'd sort of say anything from a Mark 4 MC275 and down, you're going to be most happy with. It's certainly a really versatile amp. Mac is buying at the top of the tier. I think that there's lots of choices lower in the tier. They'll still get you amazing sonic quality, like my Dynaco in front of me, or like a Fisher. That will get you, if a Mac 275 might cost you $4,000, between $2,500 and $4,000. I mean, I'd say $4,000 is probably quite reasonable, but like between 2,500 and $4,000. Um, an alternative to like the Max 75. So like a 275 and 2 channels, 75 watts. So an MC75 was single channel, 75 watts. The poor man's equivalent to that would have been a Dynaco MC60. The sonic difference, or not sonic, the power dynamic difference, like your perceived SPL difference between the two, it is almost imperceptible as far as like that extra 15 watts and how loud you play is almost imperceptible. Because what is it, like every 3 dB you have to double in power? So if you take your 90 dB speaker to get to 93 or 92 dB, you have to have gone from 1 watt to 2 watts, and from 93 dB to get to 96 dB, you have to go to 4 watts, and from 96 dB to 90, or it's every 2 dB you double in power, or 3 dB, I forget. But as it's a logarithmic scale, so like as your power, you run out of power pretty quickly as you start trying to exceed SPL. But what that also shows you is to get to 95 decibels loud, which most people are never listening above that anyways, you're actually still in between 10 and 15 watts, depending on the efficiency of the speaker. So the difference between a 60 watt Dynaco and a 75 watt McIntosh, loudness wise, is non-existent. Value, though, 100% different value. A Mark III Dynaco could be had for like $600 each. So you can get like 2 Mark III, maybe $1,000 if they're in really good condition cosmetically or electrically. So you might be able to get like a pair of them with cages on them for like $2,500, fully restored mechanically, electrically, and be beautiful and have very reliable usability. That said, I think that the 275 is a more usable choice. The binding posts have changed over time. The IEC has been implemented, so you can use whatever cable choices you want, where the Dynaco's time stopped at 1965. So like
that's a long time ago. Like, I mean, honestly, I forget how many years have passed, but stuff from the 60s when I was a kid, it was only 40 years ago. Now what? Now we're 80 years away, so.
Well, so just to give you guys an example, though, and this is one that's like made very usable. The original one, they would have, it would like the chassis. These are 2 holes for where the RCA, which was like a molded in RCA, would go, and it was ceramic, like captured in ceramic. I didn't want that. And then the power cord is captive. It has no on-off switch, so this power cord has a built-in on-off switch.
Oh, God. Yeah.
Right?
And then just screw speaker set?
And so you'd like have spades or wire.
Spades.
Lots of people use lamp cord and run it around. And that's what you're accepting when you're buying an older product like that, unless you're going to put in, like they make like upgraded ones of these that have like banana jacks in the back, but I don't think they work as well. So this is how I've done it. I make adapters. You can buy little adapters that have like little screw down connectors and then a banana jack. So you can put a banana jack in.